planning out the summer sermon series, we invited everybody within the congregation to offer their thoughts and ideas about things that they'd like to hear preached upon. And one of the things that came to me through a few people was the idea of really how do we live out our Christian faith within the world, especially when there are lots of people around us who test that faith, who make it hard for us to live as Christians. And so I wanted to be able to focus on that. And as I said, we're going to focus this week on kind of the global picture of what it means to turn the other cheek as a Christian. And then next week we're going to talk about it on a more personal basis. But today I wanted to focus on some of the stories that have been fairly apparent within the news over the last little while. And one of the first ones that I came across was that of Rehtaeh Parsons, and she's the 17-year-old girl from Nova Scotia who killed herself because of the abuse and bullying and that she was experiencing. And she kind of represents the reality that a lot of our young people are facing this day, in the sense that there's been a number of suicides that have been in the news, children who are 15, 16, 17 years old who kill themselves primarily because of cyberbullying, because they're becoming a target of everybody within their community and beyond, but it's happening on the internet, which makes it very, very pervasive. It's constantly in your face. And not only that, when you were a bully, 20 years ago or 50 years ago or whatever, you picked on the one kid in the class who you thought was weak or whatever, and it really was focused on that one child, and maybe a few others in the class knew what was going on or whatever, but that was pretty much about it. Whereas now the bullying realities are that everybody knows because you link to the site and it gets passed on and passed on and passed on. And of course in Rehtaeh's situation, it was exacerbated by the fact that she had gone to this party, she'd been drugged or drunk and had been raped, and then the photos of that rape had been posted online by the people who had done it. And the really sad part about that was that it was people who were her age. It was just other kids. It wasn't predatory adults or whatever who were going after her. It was other children, really. And they were essentially bragging about it by putting it online and making sure that everybody within her school knew about it, which of course creates immense shame, immense pressure and stress on her. And eventually it just leads to the point where it becomes so brutal that she has to end the pain some way, and so she chooses to kill herself. And then it comes on the news. That's when we come into the picture. We haven't heard anything about it beforehand. It's only after she's killed herself, after really it's too late. But then we start to hear about it, and hear about all of the terrible things that she had to endure and all of that stuff, and we hear the outrage of the parents, and we hear all of the posturing of the politicians when they start to say how terrible this stuff is, and everything. And eventually it gets to the point where the pressure rises up to a level where the politicians and the police actually have to act. And that's one of those ironic situations where up until then, the politicians and the police had basically turned a deaf ear to the situation. It was like, well, she was at a party, she was fooling around, she didn't like it, she got into a sexual encounter that she didn't want to have a part of, and but now it's rape, and so now they build it up and make it into a political situation. And so, finally, anyways, it becomes a case where they want to do something about it. And we heard in the last week or so that there had been some arrests made. And the arrests, as far as we know, aren't really interesting because you have children publishing photos and being charged with child pornography. And it's one of those situations that just causes you to really bemoan what our children are facing, in this day and age because of this sort of thing. But the whole turning the other cheek idea comes into play because when we do run into that, we find out that we've got people who have been arrested, and the first response that I had when that happened was, I hope they suffer. I hope those guys are held up to shame in front of the whole community, in front of the nation. Which, is that a Christian response? That's where this question comes in about turning the other cheek. Is it a Christian response to hope that these people who essentially drove Rhea to kill herself, that they should also suffer? That they should be shamed in front of society? And if we turn the other cheek, does that mean we're supposed to just accept that? Accept the fact that this happened, but not seek vengeance, not seek to really want these people to feel their pain, to feel the shame of what they have done. So we're going to see what comes of that. A reading from the Gospel of Matthew. Come on in. This is all part of the Sermon on the Mount, which talks about Jesus' care for, Jesus' attitude with regards to the kingdom of God and the idea of, the meek inheriting the earth and being peacemakers and really developing a society that is based on grace and compassion and acceptance. And so this is part of that. He said, you've heard that it was said, an eye for an eye and a tooth for a tooth. But I tell you, don't stand up against an evil person. If someone slaps you on the right cheek, turn to him the other cheek also. If someone wants to sue you in court and take your shirt, let him have your coat also. If someone forces you to go with him 1 mile, go with him 2 miles. If a person asks you for something, give it to him. Don't refuse to give to someone who wants to borrow from you. You've heard that it was said, love your neighbor and hate your enemies. But I say to you, love your enemies. Pray for those who hurt you. If you do this, you will be true children of your Father in heaven. He causes the sun to rise on good people and on evil people. And he sends rain to those who do right and to those who do wrong. If you love only the people who love you, you'll get no reward. Even the tax collectors do that. And if you are nice only to your friends, you are no better than other people. Even those who don't know God are nice to their friends. So you must be perfect, just as your Father in heaven is perfect. Just 4 and 6 years old are killed in New Brunswick because they are asphyxiated by a snake. This isn't happening in the jungles of Africa. It's not happening in the isolated regions of India. It takes place in New Brunswick. I mean, how ridiculous is that? It's one of those situations that is so tragically ludicrous, it is unbelievable. And when we hear it, at least when I heard it, my gut instinct was, somebody has to answer for this. Someone needs to be charged. Someone needs to be punished, because who in their right mind keep such a dangerous animal as a pet in their home and then invites children to spend the night? Oh, I know, there was no expectation on the part of the homeowner that the snake was going to escape and that it was going to end up in the room with the boys and that it was going to asphyxiate them. But just the fact that you would invite children into that setting is enraging. And there's part of me that also looks at the mother of the boys and goes, why would she allow her kids to go and sleep over at this place? Like, what was she thinking? It's like, I mean, for me, it was like bringing my grandson to my house and putting him in a room and saying, here, I'm going to put a pistol beside your bed. Feel free to play with it. And I realize it's not the same thing, and I realize it's not as calculating as that, but it was just so enraging. And yet, you can't feel angry at the snake. It was just doing what snakes do. Even when it was euthanized, I found I wasn't going, yes! Got just what it deserved. Instead, I was thinking, and I'll be bluntly honest, well, maybe they should euthanize the owner. That's not very Christian, I know. But no matter how angry we get, no matter how much we want to see somebody brought to account, no matter how much pain we want the people involved with this to feel, the reality is it's not going to bring the boys back. It's not going to make any difference to the shock and the pain that the community around them is feeling. The one difference I think that maybe has come out of this is that the society, the culture around us has become much more aware of the reality of exotic animals being kept in unsafe conditions, and so there's some actions being taken to get rid of these things. Like there was a story, two stories this week. One was where they had found this rented house in British Columbia, and there were 96 snakes that this person was keeping in this house. And he had children, he had infants in the house with him. And then there was another place where at a motel, the motel owner phoned the police up because something was odd. And when they came, they found 40 pythons that were carried around in bins. And the people are moving these things, as they're, I don't know, are they on vacation? But again, just truly bizarre stuff. But at that point, at least that's something good that comes out of it. But no matter how much happens, no matter how much society becomes more aware, it doesn't bring those two boys back, and it doesn't resolve the anger that I feel inside and the desire I have to see somebody pay for this. And knowing no one really will, there won't really be any meaningful resolution to it. I wonder if that's what Jesus meant when he said, turn the other cheek. Maybe it was just, I want you to turn the other cheek because you know what? Crap happens in life. And you can't do anything about it, so rather than allowing it to tear you apart, just turn your cheek and carry on, because otherwise you'll just drive yourself crazy. Maybe that's what he was meaning. Let's pray. So all these stories have one common theme to them. They ignite anger within us, but it is an anger that is by and large impotent. Because there really is very little that we as individuals can do to resolve this anger, to resolve the situation that created it. There's nothing that we can do to create justice or satisfaction in New Brunswick. There's nothing we can do to change the way that Rehtaeh Parsons' life is. There's nothing that we can do that will make things all better in Lac-Mégantic, other than rooting for the good guys to win, which might mean rooting for the bad guys to lose, to suffer, to be held to account. But when we read the passage from Matthew, Jesus seems to be telling us that we have to find a different way, a better way. We have to be perfect, he says to us, just as our Father in heaven is perfect. Now, let me clarify that for you right away. Because I know the first time that I read that passage and really started thinking about it, my response was, well, what's the point? I mean, I'm never going to be perfect, and so why even bother? But Jesus, in telling us to be perfect, just as our Father in heaven is perfect, isn't telling us to be without error. He isn't telling us to live our lives never making a mistake. To be perfect, as our Father in heaven is perfect, is about constantly seeking that which is right, and that which is good, and healing, and restorative, rather than being motivated by what is vengeful, what is hate-filled, what is self-satisfying. So when Jesus asks us to turn the other cheek, to be accepting of the world's abuses, to not stand against evil, he is calling for us to seek a less destructive way. Jesus recognizes what you and I see at work in our world even today, that hatred and violence in lands around the world are grounded in disputes and distrust that go back decades, even centuries. These guys try to kill these guys because of some argument that happened in 1327, and no one has ever been able to forget. And so the violence continues across hundreds of years. So that even to this day, hatred rips apart communities because people fail to turn the other cheek. As Christians, when Jesus talks about turning the other cheek, he isn't calling us to allow the world to crap all over us, to let someone treat us cruelly and to thank them for it. Jesus is instead calling us to live an expression of charity and grace that the world just doesn't understand. When he calls us to love our enemies, to pray for those who hurt us, he is recognizing that the long-term pain and destruction that comes from hungering for vengeance will be far more painful to us than the original abuse. It's easy to hate. It is much more difficult to seek grace. It is easy to want vengeance. It is much more difficult to work towards justice, to seek to love our neighbors and to love our enemies. You can certainly be hateful and vengeful, seeking an eye for an eye. But as Martin Luther King wrote, violence as a way of achieving justice is both impractical and immoral. It is impractical because it is a descending spiral ending in destruction for all. The old law of an eye for an eye leaves everybody blind. It is immoral because it seeks to humiliate the opponent rather than win his understanding. It seeks to annihilate rather than to convert. If we were to string up the abusers of Rehtaeh Parsons and run the snake owner out of town and allow the mob to do their worst against the railroad CEO, if we were to open all of the prisons and allow society to visit pain and vengeance upon all of the prisoners within, would we find peace? Would there be satisfaction? Would our community, our world be better for it? Or would it be a temporary moment of outrage resulting in nothing good, nothing righteous, managing only to calm our spirits until the next outrage comes along? Jesus, when he calls us to not stand against our abuser, when he calls us to let our cheeks be slapped, isn't telling us to be cowards in the face of the world's evil. He is telling us, challenging us to take the more courageous path, to seek to end the violence, to work for peace, even in the face of torment and injustice. He is calling us to be the ones who say the cycle of hatred and revenge ends here. Because the truth is, when I was watching Ed Burkhart on the news and being enraged by him, and when I was reading the story of Rehtaeh Parsons and being enraged by how she had been abused, and when I was reading the story about the snake and ready to strangle the snake owner, there certainly was no peace within my heart. There was no grace at work in my life. And maybe by turning the other cheek, maybe by choosing to love, maybe by choosing to seek justice in meaningful and helpful and compassionate ways, then maybe the evil of the world does die off, does become less. But what do we do when the story is ours, when it's us that this stuff is happening to? Everything that I've described is second person stuff. It's out there. It's not really us that it's happening to, it's somebody else. But we're outraged by it, we're upset by it, but it's somebody else it's happening to. But what happens when it's us? What happens when it's my neighbor who is ticking me off? What happens when it's my family member who is causing me outrage? What happens when the injustices are being visited upon me because of something that took place at work, or the government bureaucratic situations that fall upon me like a nightmare? What then? What do we do with that anger? What do we do with anger that is ours, that is personal? How do we turn the other cheek when it truly is our cheek being slapped? Well, that's a question for next week.